A critic is a creature who has views quite like a camel's. Flowers and fruit he scorns. In the flower garden of the honeyed muse he starves unless he finds a meal of thorns. Hello, and welcome to A Meal of Thorns, a critical book club from the Ancillary Review of Books. I'm Jake Brookins. Each episode, we take a book, usually a speculative fiction book of some kind, and we ask a writer, scholar, critic, or fan to walk us through what makes it interesting, what makes it problematic or enduring, how it works, and how it connects to things today. Today, we are talking about Iain M. Banks' 1996 novel Excession, part of his Culture series, and our guest is critic and reviewer Abigail Nussbaum. Abigail's writing on science fiction and culture more broadly has appeared in Vector, the Los Angeles Review of Books, The Guardian, Strange Horizons, and many more. She's also a former reviews editor at Strange Horizons. She's a regular contributor to the politics blog Lawyers, Guns, and Money, shout out to Warren, and maintains her own blog, Asking the Wrong Questions. She won the 2017 Hugo Award for Best Fan Writer, and her recent collection of reviews, Track Changes, just won the BSFA in the long nonfiction category, and is a finalist for this year's Hugo. Abigail, congratulations, by the way, and thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was really pleased that we wound up settling on this Banks novel, but before we get into it, I'm curious if there's anything else you've been reading of note that you wanted to talk about.
Well, I have just started reading Color Fields, which is Paul Kincaid's new nonfiction book from Briardine Books, who are, of course, also my publisher, which is a book about, basically histories of science fiction. And I've only just started. It's very interesting. I will probably have more to say about it in the near future. The most interesting book I read recently is an upcoming book by Nina Allen. Allen's science fiction and fantasy author who is better known in the UK than in the US. That should definitely be addressed. But if you've been reading both her fiction and her blog, you will have noticed how interested she has grown in crime fiction, in true crime. It is not at all surprised that she's ended up writing a true crime novel, but also not at all surprised that it is not at all similar to any kind of true crime novel you've ever read. It's about a murder that took place in Aberdeen in the 30s, but it is, as well as being, a very beat-by-beat depiction of the crime and how it was investigated, it's also a fictionalization of the crime from various different perspectives, very close and more distant. It's an examination of how people report on crimes, especially very salacious and sensational crimes. And it's autofiction because part of it describes a character who is Nina Allen traveling to Aberdeen to research a novel and then learning about this crime and deciding to write something else. And it's incredibly engrossing and thought-provoking. And if you love Nina's science fiction, you'll enjoy this. But if you're just interested in true crime, I think you'll enjoy it as well.
Cool. That's one. What's the name of that again?
I didn't even mention it. A Granite Silence. I should have said that.
Cool. No, that's really great. I know I need to read more Allen. And yeah, she is bizarrely hard to get a hold of here in the States. I know I was working at a bookstore in Chicago when The Art of Space Travel came out, which did get like a little bit of push here. And then I was looking because I was like ordering books and I was like, oh, what other books could we get to get on the shelf if people are interested? And it was like zero. There were like zero books I could get from U.S. distributors at that point. So yeah, that's a bummer. Need to work on that. But I am in the middle of like too much stuff. I'm just coming out of a really intense crunch period at my work. So my reading schedule has not been what I like. But catching up on things I need to review and also just need to read. I had read about maybe half of the Hugo finalists or so I'm going through and filling in my blanks there. And then I'm reading Ed Park's forthcoming short story collection coming out here. It's called An Oral History of Atlantis.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah, it's really fun, and it's fun to see him. He's such a fun writer. I often get the impression that he as a writer is having a lot of fun in his books. And it's interesting to see that kind of temper because I think like the first story in the collection, I believe, might be his first published work ever. And then it extends up to stuff that was published pretty recently. So it's interesting to see those kind of like energies change as he's sort of like playing around with what he's playing around with. But yeah, really enjoying that.
I will put a star next to that in my ever-growing list of ARCs and
Yeah.
books that I want to read.
I know, so many. But let's go back in time. Let's not look ahead. Today we're talking about Iain M. Banks' Excession. So this was originally published by Orbit in 1996. It is a sophisticated, complicated space opera. It's set right about in the middle of his culture novels, which are a loosely connected series about galaxy-spanning civilizations, sort of quasi-utopian, but all the stories kind of take place on the edges and thorny bits of it. In Excession, the movers and shakers of the culture are confronted with two problems. First, the Affront, who are a less developed but rapidly expanding civilization with kind of unsavory qualities. And two, the Excession of the title, and that is some kind of appearance of an inscrutable, highly advanced being that either threatens or offers great opportunities to everyone involved. The viewpoints of the novel, of this novel, give us more of a view of the minds, which are enormous artificial intelligences who basically run the culture, than many of Banks' novels. And it also spends a lot of time with a few humans who are caught up in the events. We'll get into this in discussion, but if you're not familiar with the culture novels, it's worth briefly pointing out that they've been enormously influential, both in science fiction proper and in various parts of the tech business media empires. We'll see how much stomach we actually had to talk about Musk today. But so we had been talking before we settled on this book and kind of like narrowed down, and I wanted to know what about this novel in particular, and sort of like what your relationship with Banks is, maybe more broadly.
I read pretty much all of Banks's science fiction between about 2005 and 2015. And basically I did what I firmly believe is the best and only way to read an author who has a large back catalog that you want to explore, which is you walk into a bookstore, a used bookstore, a library, a bookstore in a foreign country, and you just get whatever one they have.
Mm-hmm.
And you just proceed randomly without considerations of publication order or whatnot. So I read this book in 2008, and I had already read several other Banks novels, including some of the earlier novels like Consider Phlebas and Use of Weapons. Those are the first two culture novels. And it didn't do much for me. When I went back and I reread my review, I could see that it hadn't really hit with me. But, something kind of stuck with me over the years, and especially in discussing it with other people, I really felt like I had missed something. So when we started talking about what book we were going to discuss, and especially when the minute Banks came up, I said, okay, Excession. And I'm really glad I did that, because I absolutely did not grasp this novel when I first read it. And I think coming back to it has been a great experience.
Yeah, I had a very similar, when I read it again this time, and it's been, I don't know, at least 10, 15 years for me too. Since I read it the first time, I was like, I don't think I got any of this. I just had like in my head, like, oh yeah, like their ships talking at each other a bunch. So that's kind of like the main thing I had squirreled away. Yeah, I have a similar experience with Banks, and I think something that I've thought like coming back to him, and I should come back to more because it's been a minute for me. I read a bunch of his when I was in undergrad, and then haven't come back to quite a few of them. But I'm really interested in the tensions in his book, or maybe not the tensions, but the distances where he's setting up this big, elaborate, kind of quasi-utopian thing, but he's really interested in nasty stuff and nasty characters, and that's really where a lot of the focus of it goes. And I don't know, we'll talk about that more as we dive into that. But I was just thinking a lot about, Banks is sort of like, Banks in the culture are kind of a shorthand for a certain kind of far future, post-scarcity, maybe post-singularity, sort of, what's the phrase, fully automated, luxury, gay, space communism kind of thing.
Yeah.
If Star Trek didn't have budget considerations and a little wilder writers, kind of where that would go.
If Star Trek was not fundamentally conservative especially about physicality and bodies, because one of the things that you get again and again in Banks is, first of all, drugs all over the place. And like not even fun recreational drugs, but mood-altering drugs for any possible thing that you can desire. If you want to stay awake longer, if you want to pay attention, if you want to pass the time when it's really boring, You have drugs for all of those things. And of course, body alteration, including changing your gender and physical appearance to almost any possible thing, and all these things are a bit too wild for Star Trek. Like, fundamentally, I think they're both doing the same thing. Like, I think that there's a lot of similarities between the culture and Star Trek: The Next Generation, specifically that show. But he is just a lot more loose in terms of what he's willing to tolerate, in terms of just how people's lifestyles.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that, if you had replicators, why would you still like very puritanically be like walking about, wearing your pajama uniforms and drinking tea, like when you could be having anything? And that feels like what these are diving into so much. And one of the things, again, that he's so interesting in thinking like, okay, if we could do this, it would be great. And then thinking, okay, well, who are the people who would get bored by this? Where would it lead? What are the sort of like extreme edges of it? He's like very strongly never taking like a puritanical stance on the hedonist values of the culture, right? He's very pro on that. But then we look at all these people who want things that kind of like can't quite be satisfied within that world, which is what's the one human character here? Jenner Hoffen? Beer? Yeah.
How you pronounce that is, I mean, pronouncing names in science fiction is challenging just in general, and in Banks novels all the more so. But let's settle on Jenner Hoffen, because who knows?
I could be 100% wrong on this, and if anyone knows, please let me know. But more than most science fiction writers of this era, I feel like Banks just had like a random syllable generator. There doesn't really seem to be any, like the names are all just kind of like, yeah, sure.
Oh no, I have often suspected this.
Of course, contrasted with the ship names, which we'll probably talk about more, which are lots of fun and lots of thought has gone into. Just reading this, I was thinking a lot about that, how he's held up as this utopian kind of envisioner, but really looking at the edges, looking at the people who aren't satisfied. So many of his central characters I'm thinking of the character from A Player of Games, and I think Use of Weapons as well, right, are people who don't quite fit in. They're not quite getting enough. They're sort of almost atavistic, right, that they need something that the culture can't offer in some way. And to some extent, the book's being about them trying to find that. Here with Jenner Hoffen really identifying with the affront, who are, awful. They're boisterous, but they're kind of awful. And him being really attracted to this extremely sadistic, patriarchal culture that does lots of like animal cruelty for no reason and is very, very awful to their own, lower class members. And he's really attracted to that, even though he could kind of have any paradise built to his desire within the culture.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is maybe something that your reaction changes to when you come to the book in 2025, whereas, if you were reading it in the mid-90s. Because on paper, like, the idea that there are people whom the culture doesn't satisfy, it makes a certain amount of sense. There's a line in this novel that becoming an artist in the culture is kind of looked down on, because it's a way of trying to make yourself look special when, of course, you're not special. And I think that any other form of ambition and of, a drive to explore, there's no scope for it in the culture. Because if you want to be a scientist, the minds can do the science a million times better than you. If you want to be an explorer, the minds don't need you on their ships. It's actually a bit of a joke if a ship has a human crew. Those people are there for their own satisfaction, not because the ship needs them. So on that level, you feel a certain amount of sympathy. But when you read this book in 2025, it is really hard not to read Jenner Hoffen as, the Trump-leaning Gen Xer, basically.
Yeah.
That, like, someone told him he wasn't allowed to use a slur once, and now he's listening to Joe Rogan or something.
Yeah.
It really feels that way, because, he's so attracted to the affront. But at the same time, he's attracted to them because they have slotted him into the most privileged and secure level of their society. He is not the castrated servant. He is not the woman who, if she's lucky, will only get raped by members of her own tribe. Certainly not the animal who is being abused and who has been genetically engineered to experience a great deal more pain and suffering in their life than they would normally have done. So the fact that he's attracted to this life, there's a degree to which it's understandable, but at the same time, his indifference to the amount of suffering around him, I think that plays a lot less sympathetic than it would have in 1996.
I kept looking for kind of like edges to get a feel of what Banks thinks about some of these odd angles, and I don't really have one. I mean, a big one for me is that this is a civilization that supposedly has moved way beyond the kind of sexist prejudice that we have today, right? And people can change their gender, they can have any sexual orientation they want. And beer is like a caricature of chauvinism, basically, in a way that is kind of strange. And then de Gale, his partner for a bit, who's an important part of the book, feels like she's a weird cartoon of a hysterical, clingy woman for big parts of it. I want to like look for like a some sort of like repertory reading of this where like, oh, he's doing something clever with pointing this out. But it just kind of feels like really sexist stereotypes in a strong way. And I'm not totally sure what to make of that.
This is not a great Banks novel for women. I have to concede. I liked it a lot. It's pretty high up in the rankings for me, but this is not a great novel on that level. And you're absolutely right. Jannar Hofone is this completely unreconstructed philanderer. And his relationship with Dejel is complicated, and she's a little more complex than what's described, and you can sort of feel the edges of the psychological trauma that she's experienced. But bottom line, she has been sulking for 40 years, and that includes refusing to allow her pregnancy to come to term, which, aside from being pretty unsympathetic, is also just not believable. Like, even in the culture, I do not believe a person would do that to themselves for 4 decades. And it's one of the most woman written by a man things I've ever read. And if you look at other female characters in the book, you've got Ulver, for example, who is this young special circumstances recruit who has been brought in to sort of distract Jannar Hofone. And she's a fun character. I liked her. And she's, sort of bimbo-coded without being even remotely a bimbo. But nevertheless, she is a woman who spends her entire time thinking about her looks, her social standing, and the nearest attractive man that she wants to bed. And other women who show up, they also pretty much exclusively exist because they are trying to entrap Jannar Hofone sexually, which to an extent is a reflection of him, because anyone who has looked at him and said, how do we throw this man off his mission? Well, we'll just trap him with an attractive woman. I mean, that speaks to his character, but it also means that basically every woman in the novel is a honeypot.
Yeah. Again, on that just like caricature thing, like when Ulver is introduced, it's like a near chapter long riff on it's hard to get women out of the house, basically. It's like almost an entire chapter of like, come on, finish picking your clothes, finish picking your makeup.
And I mean, I love that chapter. I love that she's like, I'm going on a secret mission, but you cannot possibly expect me to go without my 3 closest friends and a horse. I mean, that was wonderful. I loved it. It was so funny, but also, seriously?
I think the thing about, besides just, I think her character is disengagingly written, my favorite part with her is at the very end, when it's the 3 of them, the 3 main human characters kind of like are meeting each other first time, and suddenly kind of seeing like, oh, Ulver is actually just kind of the well-adjusted culture citizen. Like, she's not taking things more seriously than she needs to. She's taking them as seriously as they need to, has more of a sense of like her own desires and what she's trying to do. And that kind of, that reverses a lot of the feeling I had for her earlier in terms of like where she sits in the novel.
Yeah, I mean, I think we are meant to think that she is an intelligent woman who, partly because she lives in the culture, has no scope for her intelligence except massaging her social standing and making sure that she's always at the center of attention and finding the nearest attractive man to get into her bed. But nevertheless, she is an intelligent woman. She understands people, and she's the one who is sort of able to get Dejel and Jannar Hofone to talk to one another.
I know you'd said you wanted to talk about this novel kind of intelligence thriller. And as I was reading this, something that was jumping out to me a lot, which is not hidden in the book very much, but these has like a very, very late 80s, 90s feeling kind of politics internationally, which is present in all of the culture books, I think. And it's definitely a another place where it's parallel with Star Trek: The Next Generation. But of this being very much a thriller that is sort of in the shadow of feeling very conflicted about interventionist, sort of like soft imperial policy. And it's one of the reasons that I think I like this book so much out of all the culture novels, is that we get more of the minds talking to each other. We get more of that. Because a lot of the culture books, we sort of just get the lower level humans and drones, and the big picture is kind of above us. And yeah, I don't know that I have anything that coherent to say about it, but I was just thinking through this a lot of how specifically the culture's problem with the affront and wanting to take the culture at large, sort of wanting to take some sort of ethical stance on them, but not really knowing how, and that sort of spitting up these contact and special circumstances groups that are trying to do things that are a lot shadier to handle it. That feels like, I mean, it's not that that's not going on in the world today, but that feels like it's coming out of like this very specific unease that you see Star Trek worrying about a lot, with how they think about the Prime Directive over and over again. And what do you do when you have obviously superior military, but no clear sort of like diplomatic cultural routes to engaging with someone who's doing something you don't like?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's something that exists throughout the culture sequence in one form or another. But I really do think that Excession gets to it more deeply and more explicitly. Because as you say, this is a novel that gives you a sense of the minds, and that was a departure. Because the first three culture novels, Consider Phlebas, The Use of Weapons, and The Player of Games, they had this incredible scope that is one of Banks's calling cards, but they were fundamentally focused on a few characters, mostly human characters. And the minds, if they appeared in them, were seen much more from a distance. And then he takes a break. He's writing his non-science fiction novels. He writes two science fiction novels that are not in the culture sequence. Mm-hmm. And he comes back, and this is like the first culture novel, as far as he's concerned, in about a decade, because those three novels were mostly done by the time the first one was published. So he is returning to the culture for the first time in something like 10 years. And he brings us this novel that is so much about the culture at a much higher level. And the thing is that scale is an incredibly important tool in any Banks novel. Mm-hmm. His very common move is to give you a sense, you're in a situation that feels familiar. You've got a character in their home. You've got a character who's out and about. And then all of a sudden he switches the perspective, and you understand that your sense of scale in this situation is completely wrong. Mm. And every character can be living in their own world, which is one small part of an enormous orbital, which is one small part of this enormous civilization. And you've got the culture ships that are worlds in their own right and housing millions of people, and their intellect is beyond anything that a human being can comprehend. And that, I think, that translates in a very interesting way to the way that espionage has been a through line through all the culture novels, because, of course, Contact and Special Circumstances are fundamentally spy agencies. They're, the space CIA, but good. But now, all of a sudden, we are seeing the higher levels. We're seeing, the people who are operating these agents, who are sending them on their missions, and we're seeing their plots within plots and the counter plots. First of all, the result is just, a really interesting spy story, but it also gives you a sense of how the culture functions, because it is this anarchic society that's bound together basically by ideology. One of the things that comes up in this novel is that there are offshoots of the culture who are like, they share biology, they share technology, they want slightly different things, so they no longer call themselves the culture. And the culture is united by this notion that they are, sort of exporting their liberal way of life. You've got this community that has no leadership, that has only this guiding principle to unify it. And you've got these groups within this community who are engaged in these plots within plots, all of them nominally in pursuit of this guiding principle, but often in ways that end up contradicting each other.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for one thing, it's nice to see Banks flexing slightly different muscles, just writing wise, with the minds talking to each other. He has, I mean, I don't know that I could I don't know that he's so distinctive that you could give me like one sentence or one paragraph from anywhere Banks I could immediately clock it. But he has a pretty distinct voice that he uses for most of the sections of most of his science fiction novels. But then he's so good in having so much fun at showing these minds talk to each other. And that I almost feel like, for me at least, the first time I read that, that was almost a distraction on piecing together what's actually happening. And coming through it this time, because you get pure dialogue for all those sections. You don't get you get names of the ships, which are very fun. You know, he famously has very fun ship names, but you don't get descriptions of them. You don't get action. They're just these sort of epistolary sections, and it takes a lot of work on the reader's part to piece together what's happening. But I really dig that, and the way that he slowly reveals more information, enough for you to piece together why things are moving around. Right, there's this way that within the culture novels, the humans are almost kind of like, not parasites, but like pets, basically. And it's doing this almost sort of like meta-humorous thing where so much of the book is spent on these people and getting really close to their problems and their sexual foibles and what kind of drugs they're taking and, you know, spending all this time with them. And then for these smaller parts in between, zooming out and giving us just these glimpses of the real plot. There's something very funny to me about that. And the way that these people who are really obsessed with their very real problems, at their human scale problems, and then cutting to these somewhat more humorous, basically group chat of space CIA who are doing all these really big serious things. And it adds this level of humor to the whole thing that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that connects to the way that it is an espionage novel. And we kind of have to remember that a writer like Banks, you know, he starts writing at the tail end of the Cold War, but he would have come up as a reader in the middle of the 20th century when spy fiction was this incredibly fertile field with a lot of literary experimentation, most obviously John le Carré. So while I was reading this book, there were scenes that I thought to myself, this is le Carré. You know, the way that, you like embed an agent, the way that an agent is working on their legend, and the way that this is all part of a scheme that they are not aware of. I mean, I've been thinking about this because obviously I have been watching Andor, and one of the things that show makes you think about is the incredible redundancy that goes into this kind of classic Le Carré espionage work, where to get one agent in place is not only an incredible outlay of time and energy, but the work of dozens of other people. And at the end of all that, maybe something goes wrong when they're on their way to a meet and they end up shunted into a completely different story. Or maybe something goes wrong with the person they were going to meet. And they end up waiting for nothing. Or maybe your entire plan ends up being preempted by something else. And they're there for nothing. And I think that the sense of scale in a Banks book, that just sort of dovetails with that. It's like the idiom of the spy novel and the idiom of the Banksian space opera novel. They have these resonances that really work. And again, I think that's part of why this novel works so well, because it is so much about, this group of essentially they're spies. I mean, they're, high-level intelligence operatives, and they're carrying out this very complex mission. In fact, there are 3 or 4 different missions, some of which are working at cross purposes. And they lay out these incredible plans, and then something happens, and the plans go completely awry, and they have to do something else. And the people at the bottom who were, thought that they were the active ingredient, they have no idea what's going on.
And the fact that what looks like the central plot of the book, it's not unimportant, but it's what's the reverse of a Deus Ex Machina, right? Where it looks like this is going to be this huge game-changing godlike thing has appeared. And that's what Ulver thinks her mission's connected to, right? That's what Jenner Hoffman thinks his mission is related to. But then finding out you're actually this pawn in this other game, right? That comes back around, where Sleeper Service, which is like, basically a superpower unto itself, who's been in deep cover for 40, 50 years or something like that. It just needs this one thing to happen for them to agree to do this thing. And that scale thing, right? And the way that it doesn't make it that Sleeper Service's sort of like debt to jail is not. I like that the novel goes out of way of saying, like, this is not like the person in all of the culture that's the most important to me. It's just kind of this one that I didn't quite get right and I kind of want to fix.
It's annoying. I want to tick that box.
Yeah, right. Like, before I go do like the equivalent of start or stop a world-ending nuclear conflagration, like I need to make sure this person talks to their ex, and that being, you know, why all this stuff's happening. Yeah, and that scale is great, and that shifting that the rapid viewpoint shift here gives you is so nice, and I think gives that sense of kind of I don't know, odd perspective. It adds this sort of emotional depth to parts unexpectedly and this humor to parts unexpectedly. I was even struck reading this by the very small, like very, very minor technique of using how consistently he uses time as distance to just kind of keep reinforcing to you, like, oh, that's a couple days away. But he doesn't mean days in time. He means light days. You know, that's a couple weeks out, but it's light weeks out. And constantly reminding you that these things are moving at like unbelievable speeds, at unbelievably huge distances, and then cutting back to these internal, you know, almost comedy of manners kind of scenes.
Yeah, and it's an extremely nonlinear novel. In a way that kind of fails to make itself clear until like 100, 200 pages in. You don't really grasp that you have been getting this story completely chopped up.
Right.
Like there's this lovely subplot about a drone who gets ejected from his ship, the first ship to meet the Excession, and he's badly injured. And he's just trying to get back to civilization to warn them about this, and through various adventures succeeds. And this story, we get it in parts throughout the first 100 or so pages of the book. And then at the end of it, you realize this is actually the beginning of everything else.
Right.
It was only once this drone achieved its mission that everything else could happen. And it suddenly makes you stop and think, wait, what is the order in everything else? And the order continues to be very unclear and messed up, and you have to piece it together. So I think that maybe to a degree that's also putting you in the headspace of the human characters who think that they have the whole story, and suddenly discover, no, you are a very tiny piece of a plot that has been brewing for centuries, if not longer. And actually, we decided your piece isn't that important in the end.
But and how well that comes across in, yeah, very like nonlinear, not super clear what's happening, but you start realizing that all these smaller scenes you've been getting are significant, but not in the ways you thought they were. Like, I'm specifically thinking of the scene with, is it Genoir's uncle? Is that who it is? Tish?
Yeah.
Where we have that like basically like retiree cruise ship scene where he's just chatting with this like, you know, drone basically at the shuffleboards, you know, and like, and you like slowly piece together like, oh, this is actually like another super deeply embedded agent who is confirming this information to send back to all these other working groups of different ships. But it doesn't like flare that for you. It's just, you piece that together later as you see other things start moving different directions.
Yeah, which is another, I think, element of the espionage novel. The way that, you know, you meet a character and they're doing something that seems a bit strange, and then a while later you get another piece and you realize, oh, this person was putting into motion a component of the plot. And like that is, to me, a classic element of spy fiction. I think Banks deploys it incredibly well here.
Along with the epistolary sections where we get both the conspirators and the sort of like attempting to frustrate the conspirators' viewpoints, but without enough context to really get what they're trying to do. And it's all very cordial. And it's like, yeah, it's very cloak and dagger, but it's like more cloak than dagger for 400 pages.
Yeah, but it's also like very bureaucratic. I mean, there's this wonderful scene right at the beginning where, you know, all the minds get together, the accession has been confirmed, and they're talking about what to do. And slowly, you know, more and more voices come in, and you get this reaction. It feels very classically like, who put these people on the reading list?
Yes.
Why do they have the clearance for this? This is not their meeting.
Who brought them in?
It was so beautifully done.
And that idea of like a society that is so big, and you know, that most societies are today, that it has like parts where the left hand literally doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and that we actually don't I mean, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but we actually don't meet anyone who like ultimately is against what the culture is doing. It's just these groups that have differed on how to get, and they all agree they want the same thing. And it takes such a long time for that to come clear, which is a great move structurally. Yeah. Did you, have you haven't read Transmutation Transients, the Darkly Lem novel?
I have it. I've heard interesting things. I'm looking forward to it.
I was thinking a little bit of this through here because it's doing a lot of that. So many pieces moving, and it's not totally clear what scale is the important scale, and crossing a lot of these little small layers, like lovers having a spat, and that may or may not be important to like this multi-universe altering thing, and just lots of people passing information, and it's not clear what's important, what's not. I think it's one of. I mean, we'll probably talk about this more in the end here, but one of the many books that I think owes a lot to Banks' structure and like that kind of depth and that sense of size. Actually, maybe that's a good time to take a quick break.
We haven't really talked about the Excession, which on the one hand is justifiable, because one of the points that the novel makes repeatedly is that it's just sitting there doing nothing. It is, demonstrating incredible technological capabilities that the various minds who are the most intelligent and knowledgeable beings in their society are completely baffled by. But it's still sitting there doing nothing. Mm-hmm. What's happening around it is the reaction of the various civilizations to it, and the way that the cultures, and specifically the conspiracy within the minds, the Interesting Times group, that they use this opportunity to set in motion a plan that they had having to do with the affront. So really, in some ways, the Excession is completely irrelevant. It's and I love the term that Banks uses for this, the outside context problem.
Yeah.
He's very good at, like, before TV tropes was a thing, he was very good at like codifying a trope. Mm-hmm. So like also aggressive hegemonizing swarm is a great term. So like the idea of the outside context problem of something that appears that is completely foreign to all of your frame of reference and can end up basically meaning the destruction of your society. But in this case, it's, more of an opportunity. It has shuffled the board, and now people can use this new and unexpected situation to do the things that they were always going to do. Mm-hmm. And yet he manages this while at the same time making it clear that this is something incredibly alien and powerful, mm-hmm. and truly out of context. And that to an extent, it's an opportunity, even though we don't know an opportunity for what, good or bad.
One of the things, as I was reading it this time and sort of realizing how much I didn't get the first time around and like how much work you have to do, is it takes almost until the very last chapter for the beginning of the story to really track in terms of that little drone trying to get away and what exactly was going on there. It's not until you learn that the Excession is sort of like mirroring and responding to people that whole initial sequence makes sense. Yeah, there's something so fascinating about it. Is this godlike changing event, and in many ways it feels like something out of, I don't know, older science fiction, something out of Lem or something like that. Not like this Star Trek-y kind of thing, just jetting around in ships. The way that just sort of sits there, like sort of just off screen in the novel, while all this realpolitik sort of happens in this bubble around it. I love the end of this. It's interesting to think what this novel would be if it were more about the Excession, as opposed to about the sort of political fiasco around it.
Yeah, I mean, that would sort of take you into 2001 territory. Mm-hmm. And that's not at all what Banks is interested in. He makes it clear that this is a 2001 scale event.
Right.
That this has the potential to be, an uplift moment. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, that's not what anyone here is interested in doing. And the Excession itself sort of looks around and says, okay, you guys are doing your own thing. I'll just go.
Yeah, I love the coda here. The little epilogue is so nice. and just the like, oh, I got a name out of it at least, basically. Like, I'll call myself the Excession. They got a name for me. Yeah, that's cool. It's funny coming back to this. I've been thinking a lot about Banks's influence on stuff, and it's not solitary. There are a lot of people writing space opera kind of in this general kind of mold, but he's so good at it. And just that vision of, you have this big giant society, you've cracked most of the standard kind of resource problems, so you're kind of post-scarcity in a lot of ways. And the way that the sort of endpoints are the people who sublime the elder civilizations, and this sort of like, there's that whole, is it like the Church of the Sublime where John R. gets snatched up, where he's sort of getting proselytized by these people. But just this idea of like, what do you do when you've kind of solved all the things you can do? What then? But of course, the minds still have more to do, right? Like they're not interested in just leaving yet.
Well, that is kind of the question. I was reading Paul Kincaid's critical biography of Iain M. Banks before we started doing this episode, sort of to refresh myself on his thoughts. And one of the points he makes that I do not know if I 100% agree with, but I think there's something to it, is that the culture's refusal to sublime, and it is an explicit refusal. They don't want to go because they feel that they still have work to do, that they have to be like the galactic policeman. To be the Federation, basically.
Right.
That their refusal to sublime is, in a way, an expression of civilizational immaturity. That they've reached this level and it's actually time for them to go. And the fact that they keep involving themselves in other civilizations and trying to make them more like themselves, however much we might agree that that is a desirable aim, especially in the face of something like the affront, which has been placed in front of us precisely so that we'll have the conclusion of these people are awful and they need to be changed. That nevertheless, the fact that they keep insisting on doing this is maybe not a disease, but certainly a dysfunction in their society. And like I said, I don't entirely agree with this. I don't think that Banks sees the culture as immature on that level, but he absolutely does believe that the way they view themselves, the way that they deal with other civilizations is pathological on some level. And of course, we see that in Excession, because you have this group within the minds who look at the affront and see all the many things that are wrong with them and hatch a horrific scheme, basically, to force them to become more like the culture.
Yeah, the sequence when is it the attitude adjuster is sort of like reflecting on what it's done, and just this idea that like, yeah, like, I don't know, I might have sent us down a path where they call it giga death crimes, right? And like we might have set off this atrocity beyond our wildest measures just because we were meddling and we thought it was the right thing, but maybe it wasn't. And that doubt, like literally tearing it apart. And again, it's taking seriously this idea of what is a progressive, quote unquote, liberalizing force to do when confronted with these kinds of things. If this were a Star Trek episode, it would be one little world, one little station, one little ethical problem, and we'd kind of resolve it and move on. But this, like confronting, like, no, actually our desire to do our ethics, which I mean, I do, as a reader, I agree with the culture's ethics, but our desire to enforce this on someone else might set off this giant cataclysm that's going to lead to so much misery and death. And how do you weigh those? One of the things I love about this is I love science fiction that's specifically playing around with questions of utilitarianism and pragmatism in international politics, right? Because ultimately you are talking about real things that have consequences you can't predict, and trying to balance those. And here, seeing that the way this book ends seems to be pretty clearly saying that the interesting times gang were on the wrong side of things. But if it weren't for like the very specific things that have been set in place with the Excession and with sleeper service being set up as this, ace in the hole that nobody knows about, they might have been right. They might have been proven right. We don't know. It's such an odd problem.
Well, yes and no, because one of the things that happens at the end of the novel, their plot, the genuinely dangerous plot, is foiled. But this is kind of like a knock about the head to the affront. And suddenly they realize that they've been kind of poo-pooing the culture, and actually the culture has the power to completely destroy them. And as a result, they start liberalizing, on a small scale, definitely not what the Interesting Times gang wanted, but movement in the right direction. And like it's I think left to us deliberately to say, wait, is this not a good outcome to this, sort of very negative, very reprehensible behavior? And I think fundamentally, I am still sympathetic to the desire to do something about the
Yeah,
affront. I think
right.
that, and I think the novel very much wants me to, because the way that it has designed them is very much in the aim of eliciting my disgust and my desire to do something about it.
No, 100%. And like, I don't know, making us sit there with that discomfort about, they're hyper Klingons, they're hyper barbarians, and to put in the context of the 90s, they feel like a lot of the Islamophobic fears that were being expressed, a lot of the concerns about like, what do we do if there's a collapsing world order and no one to step in and make sure everyone's following the rules, which, and ended so tragically a couple times.
But I actually, that wasn't what I ended up thinking about when I was reading the affront scenes, because to me, they read very much like 19th century British aristocrats.
Oh, uh-huh.
Like the Officers Club and the Debts of Honor, and, everyone's got to gamble on everything or you're not a man. I mean, I think they're very much coded as that
Interesting.
particular class-based stereotype. And I think that in itself, first of all, it speaks to Banks's own politics. These were people that he may not have, known specifically, but he lived in that society. But, I think it's very much designed to make us think, yeah, these people are not only like evil in the aggregate, but their individual leaders are genuinely gross and need to be taken down a peg.
Buffoons, yeah, this sort of like, hail good fellow, well met, and they slap each other on the butt and play weird pranks on each other. Yeah. What else do we want to talk about with this novel in particular? I mean, there's a lot here. I mean, with most of the culture books, we could really dig into it, but
I mean, what I found interesting is that there's a couple of things that show up here that don't really show up in other culture novels. And I'm sort of curious if it's, there was no opportunity for it, or Banks just decided he wasn't that interested. For example, there's this whole sequence where we find out that the mines actually spend most of their existence in suspended animation. Not suspended animation, in virtual reality.
Yeah, what's it called? Infinite fun space? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And like they're inventing whole universes in that space that they can, design to their heart's content and just do whatever they want with. And like, that's their entertainment. That's what they do most of the time. And that just seemed like such a weird concept. And maybe Banks kind of backed away from that because, I'm not sure you can do the two things together. I'm not sure you can say these beings are running this entire society and kind of obsessed with pursuing its guiding principle of being the galactic police, but also most of their time there's playing computer games.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of related to maybe like the general problem with representing the singularity in science fiction and thinking around it. And I don't know, this sort of hedonistic, solipsistic black hole that if you can design your own universe and just go play in it, wouldn't people just kind of fall into that and then not engage in the real world? And that's hard to balance. One of the things I do really like about this novel and about the culture novels generally is taking that idea seriously of like self-modification. What if you can change your own body, but more significantly change your own mind and decide what's going on with your mind? What does that do? What does that allow? What does that enable long term? And the minds feel like they're the more serious engagement with that, and the ones who are deciding to stick around to actually do things, as opposed to a human just deciding like, oh, I need to gland myself awake. I kept thinking like half of the problems in this book could have been solved if Jennar had like ability to like gland himself to like just lower your libido for like half an hour, and you'd probably get through. You wouldn't get like trapped by these weird counter spies.
Well, I mean, there's also the whole subplot where he and Dejel decide to both become women. Well, he becomes a woman and both become pregnant. And the way that that is depicted as basically a fashion, like it's like a lifestyle, not even a lifestyle choice. It's not even on that level. It's
Yeah.
like a new hobby or something. And Banks is not he's not an explicitly pro queer author. That's not a topic that interests him in one direction or another. But there's this extreme libertarianism, like classic proper libertarianism,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
the kind that we get that is basically just far right, which is saying if you have the ability to change your body, that very much includes changing your gender. Why wouldn't you do that?
Right.
And gender in these books is like a hairstyle.
Mm-hmm.
You can stay with what you had, you can find a style that works for you, you can switch all the time. And I think that as a result, you end up with this story where the entire concept of the sex change and the mutual pregnancy becomes an expression of this deeply dysfunctional relationship that has no future.
Right.
And they're it's like having a baby to save the marriage, only taken to absolute irrational extremes. And they're both acting like this is totally normal. And unsurprisingly, it blows up in their face. So, and I kind of love that. Again, I don't think it was intentional, but I love the way that it's basically saying that, you know what, this is not going to make you a different person. You can change your body, you can change your gender if that is what you feel like you want to do, if that's, feels right for you. But at the end of the day, your problems are still going to be your problems.
I feel like I'm on the same page with Banks politically in like the relevant ways, and it makes his handling of sex and gender just kind of a bummer because it feels like there's so much potential there. And again, he's just treating it as his fashion. But I like that idea of just kind of it coming back around to these characters staying the same. I mean, that's to reference a different novel, right? In Player of Games, that's the big problem, right? Where he's really interested in people who are kind of stuck, who are like they're in this society where both culturally and technologically they could kind of do anything they want, but they're kind of stuck in this weird place. What's the super solitary person here who lives on the pittance, who makes the miniature
Gestra.
Yeah, we're right where there's this character who like is just kind of like for some reason is kind of born extremely antisocial, right? And I mean it's cool that like the culture like finds a spot for him to go. That makes sense, but it really feels like in this society of mind altering, body altering, infinite possibilities, Banks is really interested in zeroing in on people who don't fit in some way and are stuck in these strange ways, and Jenner and DeJale being like a different example of that.
Yeah, I mean, with Gestra, reading that chapter, I thought to myself, okay, you are describing a neurodivergent person.
Right, yeah.
Like this is a guy who has spent decades building ships and bottles, basically. To the extent that he has grown miniature trees and tiny metalworking facilities just to get everything right. This is a neurodivergent person, and it's a bit startling to think that that is weird in the culture.
Yeah.
I mean, one would hope that in this perfectly liberal civilization that would not be an issue, and yet the response of everyone was, no, you are a complete outlier. Everyone else is socially well adjusted. And, if you let us, we will fix your brain so that you too will be socially well adjusted. And, as you say, it's good that he has the option to say no and then run off and live on his own. But it's also a bit weird that that was necessary.
Yeah. Oh, and again, it's that Trek thing, right? Where it's like, yes, we believe in like infinite diversity. It's a weirdly monocolored diversity when you actually look at it, right? We're like, we want everyone to be as different as they want to be, and strangely, everyone winds up looking very similar under that. Yeah, I was thinking about that. I was thinking about what's the other thing I had written here. I had some thought about Trek, but I don't know if I said this on tape. But my dog literally ate my homework for this episode, so I'm missing my notes.
Your dog is a Banks fan.
Yeah, I guess so.
I approve.
She has ingested. What's the do you know the story about? Oh shoot. Who wrote, do you know the Maurice Sendak story?
Where the wild things are?
Yeah. So he had this thing where he would try to respond to any fan letters he got, which are mostly from children. And he got this letter, and Maurice really liked the letter. So he drew a little wild thing and sent it back to the little boy. And then later, his mom wrote back to him and said, my kid liked your drawing. He liked it so much that he ate it. And Marie said, I think that's the best compliment my work has ever got, that you liked the drawing so much that you ate it. Like, that's
yeah. And very wild things, I would say.
Yeah. Totally. So anyways, I don't have my in-depth notes here, but I was trying to recreate them. I'm fascinated by Banks as this sort of exemplar apotheosis of this particular kind of space opera that I still see echoes of. And when I want to read spacey science fiction, this is kind of what I'm looking for. And there aren't that many people quite writing like this. I've said this about C.J. Cherryh as well, where like when I want like nuts and bolts things happening in space, there's like a particular kind of flavor that I'm looking for. And the culture is so good at it that I'm always fascinated when I see stuff similar to it still popping up. One of which the last couple years really dug Yudhinjaya Wisharatne's Salvager books. I don't know if you've seen these. They're a little hard to get a hold of, but Pilgrim Machines, I think, is the last one, which are very much in this tradition of thinking about what happens if we keep developing both artificial intelligence and like the ability to modify ourselves, and what happens that all of the sort of main speaking characters of that are ships, but they began as humans and like over the course of like decades or centuries have developed into these bigger intelligences. And I enjoyed science fiction that is kind of like not using the idea of AI or robots in a sort of off-the-shelf way, but thinking about like, what if we could actually modify how we think and what we're thinking and what we're feeling? Because that very quickly goes interesting, strange directions. I was reading this thinking about both the minds deciding whether or not they're going to go to, infinite fun times or whatever it's called, the kind of video game space they go into, and thinking about the way that all the human characters here are deciding whether or not to, secrete their own drugs and what they're going to secrete and how it's going to change what they're doing. I was thinking about some of Greg Egan's work where he's thought so much about what happens when you get sort of more direct control over what your mind is doing, more technological control over what your mind is doing, and how that opens up these sort of strange, unpredictable spaces of what you can become and sort of like more directly taking control of that. And that feels like even though the takes on gender and sexuality here are just kind of thin, that fundamental idea of you should be allowed to change yourself how you want to and embrace that, and you should have control over what you turn into, is just a thread throughout the culture that I find really interesting. I'm always looking for work that's picking up at that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that there isn't a lot of science fiction that feels a great deal like Banks. And I think particularly in space opera, there's been a movement away from a lot of the things that were emblematic of him. I think a lot of the more recent space opera is more explicitly anti-imperial, and as a result, much more focused on individuals. Even if you've got something like Anne Leckie's Imperial Raj series, where the individual is a ship mind that has undergone various convolutions and the whole question of individuality is a bit fuzzy. Even then, we are talking about an individual actor affecting a large system. Whereas in Banks, it's not so much that that's impossible as that the individual stretches our understanding of what that means to a much greater extent than I think any other author has tried. But I think probably the one author I've read who sort of reminded me of what Banks is doing is Yoon-Ha Lee.
Oh, yeah.
The Machineries of Empires series. I think like the whole concept of like the calendrical weapons and how the calendar you use and the math that you use affect reality. I think that has a similar mind-bending quality, that sense of scale that I was talking about before. Like this idea that you can like change the substance of reality, and again changing people's minds, because this affects also the troops' perceptions of reality and how they are able to function in the battlefield. And so this sort of like literalized metaphor really for the power of empire, that nevertheless has this kind of mind-bending quality that I think does not exist in a lot of other space opera, which I have found to be much more literal-minded.
Yeah. Actually, no, that's a great example. I need to come back to those. I really like the Hex Arcade series, and they're also doing that thing with using galaxy spanning, like literally galaxy altering politics and military engagements, and very close up, this person's individual psychology affects why things are happening the way they're happening, and kind of moving between those levels. That's good.
Yeah.
I dig that. We're not going to talk about Ali for this whole episode, but I dug how that series kept surprising me. Like, it laid out so much of like kind of how it works in the first one, but then it kept making these turns I didn't expect, like how important the non-human intelligence become, and how you start getting a sense of like other things going on that you haven't been following narratively, but are still really important. Yeah, I just dug that. So
yeah.
Any last thoughts on Excession or on banks and the culture generally?
Well, just mainly that I came to this novel not having properly appreciated it before, and I really think that it deserved a second, evaluation. I'm really glad that I read it. I also think that the pairing of it and the next culture novel, Look to Windward. These are two novels that really should be read in a pair, because you were talking earlier about how the plot of the Interesting Times gang could have ended up in Gigadeath. So Look to Windward is about what happens when that in fact happens.
Yeah.
When there's a plan that is well intended with, an aim that we might be sympathetic to, and it goes catastrophically wrong. So I think that those are the two novels that kind of sum up the culture, that if you want to get it, you should read the first three because they give you the basis. And then those two, the next three novels, the ones that he wrote in the 2000s are obviously they're good. I think they're kind of in search of something to say. But whereas as Excession and Look to Windward, they are very decisive about what they're saying. And I think doing something that very, very few other authors of science fiction and space opera have done.
Yeah, totally. And I want to go back just to listeners, if you haven't read Banks, I 100% support your approach to it, which is just pick up the first one you see and then figure it out, because it's kind of more fun. But yeah, these two do feel central. What's the later one where it's this society that's about to sublime? And then
the Hydrogen Sonata, that's his last
the last
book.
one. Yeah. I remember liking that one a lot too. I haven't read it in a while. But before we get going, anything you want to share with people about what you're working on, or where they can find your writing?
Well, first of all, you can find my writing in the Hugo Voter Packet if you are a Hugo voter. I will shamelessly plug that. My book Track Change is in the Voter Packet. Otherwise, I write on my blog, Asking the Wrong Questions. I write on Lawyers, Guns, and Money. I write on my Blue Sky account. I'm not working on anything specifically at the moment, but I'm just going to say this in the hopes of urging myself to actually do it. I have been, for several years now, planning another entry in my series, A Political History of the Future, about the title I gave it was The Other Ministries for the Future, like fiction about, fixing climate change. So, and, the main reason I haven't gotten to it is I have several things laid out that I need to read for it, and they're all quite long.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to say this in the hopes that, I will embarrass myself into actually getting it done, maybe even this year.
Our podcast audience will hold you accountable to
exactly.
Yeah. That's great. What do you mind if I ask, what are some other titles you're looking at? Are you looking at nonfiction as well?
I wasn't thinking so much about nonfiction. One book that I've already read is Ned Billman's Venomous Lumpsucker.
Yeah.
Which won the Clarke Award a few years ago. And it's about, basically, it's this dark comedy about a world where, you have carbon credits today, where in that world you have extinction credits. And, naturally that becomes basically just a financial instrument. Insanity proceeds from that. And one that I haven't read yet, I'm a bit wary, but I think I am going to have to read it, is Neil Stephenson's Termination Shock.
Yeah, you kind of have to read that, unfortunately. I have this, for a while I was thinking about writing something about this, and then a combination of I never got to it, and it might have been too annoying to myself and to others. But I love the way that there's this period where it seems like Kim Stanley Robinson and Stephenson are writing books to each other, even though I'm like 99% sure they don't read each other's work. But Termination Shock is bizarrely in parallel with Ministry. They read against each other very well. So I'll say that's all I'll say for now. But
Yeah, that was definitely the impression I got, and I kind of heaved a great sigh, but I am going to have to read it if I actually write this piece.
I'm one of those people who I'm blessed that I at least enjoy reading Stevenson, so I don't find it on a page level annoying, but I can also go down a 4-hour YouTube hole, which I feel like Stevenson did multiple times while writing that book. So
Well, the thing is that Stevenson was an author that I absolutely loved starting from my teens, and I absolutely enjoyed going down the 4-hour YouTube hole with him. And then, what we were talking about earlier, the Gen X guy who kind of shifts rightward, that is definitely the vibe I get from him. Maybe not, extremely rightward, but definitely in that general direction. And that's starting to show in his fiction, and it sort of got harder and harder to read.
yeah, I mean, we successfully avoided talking about SpaceX or Blue Origin or anything in this episode, but I think Stevenson's gone down that similar route of just kind of finding himself in this position vis-a-vis a sort of libertarian influenced technology, and just sort of eventually leads you down certain chains of thought that get weirder. Well, best of luck if you do that. I'm very curious to read. I really enjoyed your last series in this vein, so I hope you get to this one. So
I will try.
And another +1 to people listening, if you haven't picked up Venomous Lumpsucker, it's a riot. So. Well, thanks so much. This was really, really nice. I really appreciated the chance to come back. I haven't come back to Banks in a while, even though he comes up in conversations so often. So yeah, this was a nice chance to revisit.
It was, I have been telling myself for years that I ought to come back to this book. So you also gave me a tremendous opportunity to do that. So thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I also want to say, just as a closing parting note to myself, I'm going to hold myself accountable to this, is one of the things I've been doing throughout this podcast is, as people mention other genres that are influencing and overlapping and Venn diagramming, and I need to read more spy fiction. I need to read more espionage fiction. So I think this one pushed me in that. So that I'll be looking to pick those up this summer. So
yeah, I definitely am underread, in Le Carré. I've read 1 or 2, and I should definitely have read more.
Yeah, well, more TK, as they say. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
A Meal of Thorns is a podcast from the Ancillary Review of Books, an online magazine founded to address the radical possibilities of criticism with a focus on speculative fiction, world literature, and utopian impulses. Go to ancillaryreviewofbooks.org for regular reviews, essays, interviews, and more. Our opening poem is by Barsha Hari, translated by John Bruff. Our music is by Giselle Gabriel Garcia. Our artwork is by Rob Patterson at The Ratio Farm. Thanks to our human transcribers, Kate Dollarhyde and John W.M. Thompson. They are diligently working on getting us caught up on our transcriptions. If you'd like to support the podcast and the Ancillary Review of Books, that is rad. A few different ways you can do that. Join our Patreon. A couple dollars a month really moves us towards our sustainability and contributor paying goals. You can hang out with us on Discord, and we've got a couple other goodies in the works. If you're interested in a book we mention, buying from the bookshop link in our show notes or at the ARB website gets us a cut, and it helps us immensely if you just help get the word out about the show. Leaving us a review, commenting, or sharing on your platform of choice, that really helps. And it's nice to know you're listening. Questions, suggestions, pedantic notes about things we got wrong? Drop us an email at mealofthorns@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Blue Sky for periodic skeets, I guess. Did that term stick? All right, I'm going to be traveling here for a little bit. I'll eventually be winding up at ReaderCon, which is usually really quite good conference up in Boston. So next time I am going to do it. I've got a whole plan. No book for that one. I'm going to be putting together an episode about the conference, my travels, doing some quick interviews. Might have a few coffee interludes because that is a thing I do. We're back to books on Monday, August 11th, talking about Tad Williams' Stone of Farewell with Carlo Hugo Rodriguez. Check out our website if you'd like to see what's next and read ahead. Until then, thanks for listening, stay cool, and stay critical out there.